They're so
All right.
polite, aren't they?
They are? All right. Okay. So, man's search for meaning. Let's make sure this is all right. Good. Small book.
Small Kindle.
Big ideas.
Big book. Big books.
Yeah.
How did you find it?
Oh, I found it years and years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago.
In
Your
your
Rabbi
other life?
mentioned.
In my other life,
your
yeah.
That's psychologist.
That's a good segue into the book. Yeah. Yes, I read this years ago, and I mean, needless to say, I think that, with the premise of our book club, looking at things from a general works of literature from a Torah perspective, I mean, this one it's almost as though every line almost, brings up another concept that is so fundamental. Come on in.
Sorry, really?
No, at all, not at all. Come on in. Brings up a concept that is so fundamental to the core meaning of life. That the thing that was, what I felt when I read it was that it touched on so many important elements that I had kind of felt but didn't have an articulate enough way of expressing it. But at the same time, I felt, and I was a bit comforted in the fact that he expressed it so, at the point that he wrote it, because he's talking about the entire 20th century. I mean, in certain points, he's talking about the mindset of the 20th century human being, in the Western world. That for what I had felt were the deficiencies, concerns, worries, lackings, what have you, of the human condition or human perception, I think is a better way of saying it. He had articulated. And I can't help, even now that I read it through again, I read through most of it again for us, for our meeting. I wonder if this book wouldn't be thrown out by so many modern thinkers as hogwash. I don't know. That's not necessarily the first question I was going to pose to the group, but I wonder, how do you feel? I mean, how do you feel this book would stand in, a modern university setting? And I know that's a broad place because there's many departments in a university, but, I'm thinking about our young minds, our young thinkers. How would this book fare?
What is the purpose of the university? Is it to strengthen their intellects?
Mm-hmm.
Is it to motivate and inspire them for their own lives?
Well, that's a good question. My question is, do they sense that he deals a lot here with the question of the meaning of one's life, right? The meaning of one's life. And he quotes thinkers that completely, that say the complete opposite, that there is no meaning. And not only that, there are the majority of existentialist philosophers. I mean, he claims to be an existentialist, right? He's thinking in existential terms. But to me, one of the interesting things about it is that, if you look at Sartre as an existentialist, you look at these types of existentialists that are basically embracing the fact that life is absolutely random, has no meaning, and deal with it. Right? Deal with the fact that all you've got is whatever it is that you make of it. Where he's coming at it from a very different perspective. He's saying your choice of response is what you always have. But he includes the fact that life is inherently meaningful. It may be different in terms of how it is that you see it, but there's certain inherent meaning that's objective, which is why he actually writes explicitly. He says the meaning that a logotherapist should help one discover is not meaning that is perceived, but meaning that one can find in the world outside. Or the fact that he writes about the only real, the real existential realities are the ones that have passed us. And you remember that? Do you remember that? The ones that are in history. Do you remember that? Did you read that? Let me see if I can bring it up over here. I think I put it down. Yeah. I don't know if we have the same pages. 120 in mine. Life's transitoriness.
thing with this? It depends on the size of the font.
I don't know if it is. No?
I have live transitor
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
123
Yeah.
I've got.
Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. Where it says those things which seem.
Yes.
Yeah, you have it? Those things which seem.
You have the same.
You can
No,
search
I
it.
know
you
it's
have
pale.
it.
I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you.
Are very much.
He writes, those things which seem to take meaning away from human life include not only suffering but dying as well. He says, I never tire of saying that the only really transitory aspects of life are the potentialities. But as soon as they're actualized, they are rendered realities at that very moment. Realities. So he's saying something that is so not only counterintuitive, but so not the way we tend to think in a modern world, that the only realities that we can bank on as realities are things that are no longer here. Yeah, at that very moment, they are saved and delivered into the past, as though the past is an existential reality. Right? You have to accept that the past is an existential reality. For in the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but everything irrevocably stored. And I don't know. It's just, I mean, you know. What do you say to that? I don't know. What do you say to that? I mean, I guess we can talk about it. I mean, does it resonate with your own personal experience of the world and life? And in that, and for that matter, is it something that, you know, I would be embarrassed to say this. I'm honest with you. I would be embarrassed to say this in a room full of thinkers today.
Well, that reality is only reality once it has been experienced and
that once it has
relegated
passed,
to the past.
yeah.
Well, once
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
is relegated to the past.
But it's fact. But that's fact.
Yes.
It's experience.
But it's not. But
You
prove
can't
it.
say-
You know?
You can't say what's in front
Why
of
would
you
you
is
be
experience.
embarrassed? Why would you be
I'm saying it. Not that I would be. I mean, I would say it, but
He's saying it
I would be laughed out of the room.
It's like scientific.
But it depends who you're with, surely.
Of course, it depends who I'm with. But I'm talking about the majority of modern thinkers. I'm saying that I believe, I would be pleasantly surprised if I wasn't, but I believe that I would be laughed out of the room. Because it requires, I don't think that he's saying it from a perspective of belief, which is why I enjoy this book so much. He doesn't do much of that. There's a subtlety here. He's not talking from a perspective of belief. He's talking from a perspective of experiential knowledge. I'm glad that you resonate with me. And it is such a difference. It is a huge difference. And, you know, even though I said we wouldn't be reading Jewish, and I don't consider this to be particularly a Jewish-themed book, but this too is not necessarily, you know, a popular thing to say, but it's a Jewish perspective. Because other religions, Christianity specifically, because other religions are so deeply based in belief, they have no issue speaking from belief-based perspectives. And belief-based perspectives can be very often mistaken with experience or experiential realities that cannot necessarily be proven through logical deduction. You know what I'm saying? So, because of that, the elements that he writes here can be lost in you know, casual sweeping away of, well, you have to believe that. It's something that exists in your mind, not necessarily in reality. But the things that he writes about love, for example, you know, it's the highest. He was convinced, the story that he says when this person said, imagine our wives, if they could see us now, what we and from that one statement, he was brought to the reality of what love meant to humanity, to a human being, what it is to connect to that. Yeah.
It's one of the few emotions he does focus on.
Very much so. I mean, he sees it somehow as the ultimate in one's existence.
Because that's what saved him. You know, the thinking about his wife and thinking about his life, and he admits, he said, that's what got me through the dreadful days.
But he saw it because he felt that it was of highest value. He talks about, that the only way that one can connect as a human being with another person is to love that person and to allow that person into their inner soul. He talks about these things not as some, spiritual, yogi. He's talking about it as a thinking, logically oriented person.
And
Yeah.
love doesn't have to be returned. It can be just one-way love,
It could
as long
be.
as you have the belief
Yeah.
in that love.
Yeah. So I'm wondering. What were your experiences? Let's talk in more general terms first, and then maybe we can talk about some of the points that he brought out here. But in general terms, this man, his vision of the world. What did you feel about it? What did you think about it? Did it resonate with you? Did you find contention in the ideas that he put forth? I'm interested in hearing. Is it too broad a question?
No,
Yeah.
I think applies to today. I
Mhm.
think his ideas, they're not something that apply there and that age, and
Mhm.
nowadays there's nothing. It has moved on the thinking.
Mm.
I think applies very much, and I agree with him. But he gives three meanings, or broader meanings of life, and one was love.
Mm.
Another one was work or creative
Mhm,
work.
mhm.
On you dedicate your life to something,
Mm.
and then the other one was your attitude towards suffering.
Mhm.
And I think his weaker point for me is the attitude towards suffering,
Mm.
because
Okay.
not everyone will see it that way.
Mm.
The bravery and the courage of suffer in a way stoically and with a meaning, or I don't think everyone will see, and that's for me the weaker.
The weaker argument.
Yes,
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm.
I
But
don't think he was necessarily saying that you have to be brave. I think he was talking about how you deal with suffering. And I don't think he was even saying that some people were winning and other people were losing this battle of dealing with the suffering. But he sort of explored the whole thing and didn't just dismiss it as something that came upon us and we had to deal with it.
yeah, it had a value. It has a value how one takes the suffering when you cannot avoid it. But I think if he's talking about the therapy, and if someone who's suffering nowadays, and you tell them that there is value in their suffering, and how his attitude towards that suffering, I don't think that person who bears that suffering will be comforted by his explanations.
It's an interesting point, because he pretty firmly asserts that suffering ceases to be suffering once it finds meaning.
Which is his comment about the old man who lost his wife.
Right.
I
Where,
think
what if you died first,
yes,
right?
and he just changed everything
It completely
around.
flipped. There was a few
Yes.
times where he brings these ideas
Yes.
out. But for some reason, he it's interesting, because he brings this out as almost like a rule. Suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. That's the way that he puts it. And what you're saying is that you're not so sure.
I think not someone who is suffering deeply,
Mm.
I don't think that it will always be comforted by the fact that his suffering or her suffering has a meaning. And
Mhm,
even when they find the meaning,
Mm.
I don't think
One doesn't
always.
always have the capacity.
They won't accept it.
Right.
No,
So
but that's because nobody outside can say to the person suffering, no, don't worry about this because it has a meaning. You've got to think that for yourself.
Mm.
I think it's got to come from inside you.
Mm.
And some of the things he said when he was actually in the camp, he was saying that they were moved to a different camp, and he said it was terrible because they were cold and freezing and his feet were sore and he was starving. But it wasn't so bad because it didn't have any chimneys,
right.
and it wasn't Auschwitz.
Right.
And that's
And there was a
and
certain joy even in
yeah,
that. That
amazing way
yeah.
to look at
He's
it.
a very much half glass full person, isn't he?
Well, he definitely was. He definitely was a glass half full person. But I wonder if, because I wondered why he wrote the book this way. Because he has the first part chronicling, with commentary, his experience in the camps. And not only his experience in the camps, but his observations about different people experience the camps, which I'm very thankful for.
Yeah.
I'm personally
Yeah,
very
it
thankful
is.
that there aren't a lot of people that went through examining the experience, not only perspective, but other people. I mean, thank goodness he was a psychiatrist before he went in. But even if people did do that, who wrote about it so articulately, I wondered though if he didn't open the book that way as a basis for. In other words, it's almost, I feel that he almost went to the efforts. He didn't write he didn't chronicle his experience in the camp so that we could read this on Yom HaShoah. He did this for a treatment of the human condition. This is what he wanted to do. He wanted to put out a scientific, experientially based treatment of the human condition in a circumstance that is thankfully rarer, the rarer element of our experiences, and yet understanding it from that perspective. And so what he writes, a few times, for example. So I'm wondering if he had not opened his book with that as an anchor for that statement, in terms of what it is that he says about suffering. Because if there's one man, he writes later on in the book, he goes, not only am I a neurologist and a psychiatrist, I survived 4 camps. So I speak from that perspective in terms of the personal suffering. But what he writes, interestingly, and this might go to your point, because it's true, in our experience, it's not necessarily. I know people, just as a rabbi, who've spoken to me, that just because meaning might be offered to their suffering, substantial meaning, does not necessarily placate. It could be that they refuse to absorb it, like they won't accept it. But what he writes, which I found fascinating, was that the people who had rich inner lives before they went into the camps, and may have been slight of build and physical composure, often weathered the experience better than people who didn't, because they were able to retreat into a weight of being.
Escape. It was a form of escape.
And that was so profoundly meaningful for me. It helped me, not only in terms of my own life, but in terms of what I wanted to do in my own life and how I wanted to approach my own life, but also in terms of being able to relate to people and help people in life. Because one can understand a perspective and where one is coming from and how a person is seeing and what they did wrong. And sometimes a person simply doesn't have from where to pull the strength. It's not something that's a default. So I felt that was very, and that's maybe perhaps why, he believes in the concept, but it doesn't always manifest because it's not always something that a person can absorb, perhaps.
But he also wanted to argue strongly against Freud's position, where put a whole lot of people together and they'll all descend to the worst. That's what he basically was saying.
In such circumstances.
In such circumstances.
Right.
And he was saying Freud wasn't in the camps. He didn't see the good
He
things
didn't
that I
see.
saw, and the person giving away his last piece of bread, and generally people behaving very decently.
Yeah.
But I think, isn't there a danger of thinking about meaning as in a certain sense something that's given, and that life is something that you experience in a largely passive way, whereas one can interpret, I think, at least a lot of what he says, as meaning that life is a challenge of various sorts, and so there's the challenge of creating something, and you give your life meaning by creating something that is your creation, that embodies whatever it is you're putting into it, by having a loving relationship with somebody. And then the highest one, he's suggesting, I think, is you're presented with a challenge of an environment or an enemy that is trying to reduce you to something subhuman, and the challenge is to remain a moral agent of some worth. And I think the word, well, let me say this, see how you react. The word meaning is itself rather misleading, because I don't think it makes much grammatical sense to say what is the meaning of life, because meaning is a connection between some sort of symbol or manifestation and somebody who means something by it. So, if the teacher claps her hands, that means it's the end of the lesson and you can all go out. It's not that clapping the hands means that, that's what the teacher means by it. And so we can ask, if we ask what is the meaning of life, we can ask, well, who is doing the meaning? Who is the agent that is meaning? And I think his answer is, well, it has to be you.
Absolutely.
And that's the challenge. That is the challenge.
It is. It's I point out oftentimes when I'm doing Bereshit. So Bereshit, in my opinion, it deals a great deal with the parasha Bereshit, not the book, not the whole. The whole book does, but the parasha. It deals very much with the nature of the human condition. In other words, how it is that it's putting out the nature. And one of the most amazing things in the book of Bereshit is that there's this point where Adam is asked, the Adam, right? He's called the Adam. He's never called Adam until post eating from the tree, right? He's simply called the human, right? Which is literally what Adam means. And he's asked. It doesn't even say that he's asked by God to name the animals. The animals are brought to him. That's what it says. And it's the most wonderful way that it says, because it says, and God looked to see what he would call them. He would see what's he going to call this one, right? And it's a tale, almost, I believe, what you're pointing out, and where the meaning of a thing is through this interaction, right? So where he has this, and it's from that story that he recognizes he doesn't have a love of his own, right? That he can engage with, that he can interact with, that he has a relationship with. What happens is he goes in and the Torah then says, in Chol asher yikra lo ha'adam, whatever it is that the human called it, Hu Shemo. That was its name, right? It wasn't that God called it and so you got it right. It was, okay, well, tell me what you call this. The Midrash in two areas extends this beautifully. So it continues. The Midrash picks up on the story and continues to go, okay, and what's your name? And he says, well, I'm Adam, because I come from the Adonai. He goes, and what's my name? God asks. And he goes, well, you must be Adonai, because you're Adon, Kolar, you're the master of all things. So we see that God's name is given this way. It's all a question of the interaction. The other thing is, which people think he's crazy for, but I think that it happens to be a brilliant, recognition of what's happening over here. Rashi says that the way that he experienced the name, or that he got to the name of all the animals, was that he actually slept with the animals. Which is crazy. Crazy. You don't say that in Cheder, but this is what he says, right? And so whether it was literal or not is not the point. The point is that there was very experiential and intimate knowledge of what this entity is, right? How do I understand this entity? How do I experience this entity? And that meaning is something that we essentially, I don't know that we bring to it. In other words, there's this confluence, there's this connection between what it is, my experience of it, that allows for meaning to emerge. And I think it's very much what it is that he's saying. That it's so of Torah and how Torah sees what man is meant to be, which is why we look at the oral Torah, the stuff that we're defining, as so valuable. There were the Karaites accept written Torah and not an oral. They don't accept this element of what you're saying, that our assertion of meaning, of our condition, right, of what it is to be human, and we are saying, in other words, the beauty of an oral Torah just picks up from animals. It's just the next step of the naming of the animals. Okay, so now what do you call your world, and how do you define a world, and just get more and more specific, and that becomes the endeavor of the idea, and that meaning is the most celebrated. It's the most celebrated.
What I found sort of interesting, I was talking to Frank about the book coming here, and I was just talking about meaning, and Frank said it's also purpose. What is the purpose of your life? What is the what is the purpose of your
existence,
of your being in life? I think in contemporary society, in many other societies,
meaning is very wide.
Purpose can be more directed, you're saying.
Is that there is either no meaning or no purpose. So it pushes people to extremes. the magnet is something very extreme that seems very definite and therefore seems to be able to channel your life into a purpose
Something.
and a meaning. Because it's far too difficult, or it's too
Too broad.
too broad,
Yeah.
too flimsy, too sort of.
Which is a point that he makes. He made a nice analogy where he says, "Don't what about the, sorry."
He was talking about this woman who had all the wealth and all the riches,
Mhm.
but she
Yeah.
had no children.
Mm.
Did you have that at the end of
Yes.
the book? And she said, "Oh, I'm a complete failure," and burst into tears.
Mm.
And another woman had a crippled son, and she thought she was a failure because she wanted to commit suicide, and he turned it on its head for her, and she saw that she had absolute purpose,
Exactly.
because the boy wouldn't be what he
Well, she wanted to commit suicide after the other child
Died.
had died.
yeah.
She has a
And
child that died and a crippled
Yeah.
child.
A
Yes.
crippled child. And she wanted to end her life after the
But he wanted to live.
He
Yes.
stopped.
Yeah.
He
Crippled
stopped.
wanted to
He
live.
gave her joy.
It seems to me that his, whether it was a thesis, whatever it was he wanted to write, was holding him, and not holding him, was almost pushing him forward.
Mm.
He was so determined to get these words, his ideas, down. Come what may, he had to survive to get this
I
down.
think
It's
that
amazing.
Sorry, the fact that he had his manuscript taken from him at the beginning, which must have, he was about 30 when
He calls it his mental child.
Yes,
Yeah.
And
yes.
that's right, and he had that taken away from him, and so he had to keep it in his head.
Mhm.
And I think that he writes sometimes about when he was going through the most awful experiences, that he could actually lift his mind out of it, not for long periods and not very much, but he
could go
did
above
try
the
to do
pain.
that,
Yeah.
and that sort of explained how he survived
Mm.
it.
That was his salvation.
Mm.
I think he put a lot of store on that. Almost you
Absolutely.
need something to hold on to.
But that's a kind of allegory of the survival in extreme adversity, which is that your past life is a kind of moral construct of your experience and what you've brought to your experience and so on. Just as his manuscript was an intellectual, creative construct of what he'd written about logotherapy and all that into account. And just as they took his manuscript away from him, so they took his food away from him, and his comfort, and his warmth, and his clothes, and everything. And this is a challenge, and the challenge is to survive as a human being and make a reality out of what you have already in you, and that you want to produce and create.
But aren't you born with a character that, you see, if something is two people and have the same experience, one will crumble and will just give up, and one won't. And the fascinating thing is, why? Why does one crumble? I mean, I'm talking now generally, but obviously physically, it just depends how weak you are, how strong you are.
Well,
but
that's
it's also your mind.
that's what
I
he
think
said. You
that's
come with
more.
certain
Yeah.
strengths to this
Yes,
adversity,
yes,
and you can
but-
draw on it.
Yes, but even if you,
There's a
You're not
certain.
born
He-
with it. You're not
even
born
if
with
you
the character.
do.
You're not born with the
I'm
character.
sorry?
You're not born
makes
with the character. You
You
create a
develop.
character. You create a
you
character
do
for
develop.
yourself
Right,
by
that
your
was-
experiences in life.
Writing that this
But
way.
he makes this point. He makes the point
Hasn't.
in this book.
I'm done. Sorry. I'm kibitzing.
He makes exactly this point in the book. He said, "We are all put in certain conditions, and we are the ones that make the
The choice.
decisions." And he said that more
Yes.
than
Yes,
once.
he said we had a choice. Every day we had choices
We have
in
choices,
the camp.
and some people will go left, and some people
But
will
our
go
choices
right.
are based on our character, experience, whatever you want to call it, your strength from before. It's your choices that you make are a result of what you've been through prior to that, and your
Yes, but
But
we're
what
all
you've
born
been
the same
through
way.
and what you can see for yourself in the future.
Well, they
But
can.
that's-
They can be. I'm not sure that they always are,
No.
because
No.
we have the
It's
possibility
not.
to spontaneously choose.
Yes, yes.
You know.
But
And-
it's not.
No, please.
I think one very important thing he says is that when you're confronted with a decision, whether it's to eat another ice cream or something of more significance, that you can look forward to the moment after you've made the choice and carried it out, and imagining yourself in that after moment, look back on that little moment in your life. Was that good or was that bad? So
If
it's
you're living
an
a second
awareness
time.
that all
So
the
it's going
time
forward.
another brick to your character and your life.
But
If-
it's going forwards and backwards, isn't it? Because
Yes.
you make the decision, and then you think, well, was it the right decision?
If
But
you were
but he's
living a
saying
second
before you
time.
make it, before you make it.
Well, he said, right, if you were living a second time around,
Yes.
Yes,
right,
that's
and you
right.
came to, is this what you know, how would you make this choice, the finite nature of life and all that? And he's very much
Is it-
into that. That point, though, was indeed a running theme through the book, wasn't it? That we always have the choice to respond how we wish to respond. We may not always have the choice of our circumstances, but we always have the choice to respond. It was probably the first time I read this book, the greatest single lesson that I got out of it. Yeah.
But was he not saying that some of those people in the camps, some of the people in his room or barracks, whatever, had gone beyond that? They couldn't even focus on their choice.
Yeah, I think that,
That's
you know,
when life
when that
ends.
was it, when they weren't able to do that. Yeah.
But
I-
I think
They
that
had
your
to
point
sit
about
with
living life
Yeah,
as if it's,
when you were going.
as if
Yeah.
it's the second time
Mhm.
gives you an insight into you've actually got to think very carefully what you do
Mm.
to make sure that you make the right choices. Because
Although
quite
with
often
eating ice cream,
instinctively
it's
you
never
don't
clear.
always make the right choice.
But he left a lot to fate as well. He trusted fate. He made the choice to trust fate.
He did. He made the choice.
Yeah.
He made the
Do you
choice.
think to trust
But-
fate? To stay where he was and not go.
Well, in
no, and
certain
when he-
instances it saved him.
It's
Yes,
exactly
when he didn't get on that
Mm.
one
the
convoy.
midnight
'cause he-
truck or whatever.
Where he knew-
That was
Behind
out
the time.
of his character, which was loyal. He wanted to be with
Wanted
his
to
friends.
stay with them.
Mm.
Or
with
patience, with
the
patience,
patient.
yeah.
Yeah, with the patients.
Yeah, with
And then not escape. He could have escaped.
But
But he
later
went
chose
back,
not to,
but he
and
went back.
Yeah, but later on also he wanted to get into the truck just when he was liberated, the camp,
Yes.
and he couldn't.
Didn't
I don't
get
know
on
why
it.
what
It was
happened.
full.
He couldn't,
There wasn't room.
and he was so disappointed that he couldn't and stay behind. And then those got burned, and so it was a mixture of him being loyal and decided for
He didn't
himself.
trust fate.
Yeah.
It's just fate.
If this is my fate, if this
Yeah.
is gonna bring me death, okay, but I want to be loyal.
Yeah.
And the other was luck or
Right.
whatever,
He trusted
or the
God to
divine,
the
or
best of
whoever you want to put it.
You
With-
said,
with
Rabbi,
dead
you
or
said
alive.
that religion didn't
But it was
feature very
motivated
much.
by
He
the
didn't
divine.
talk
He
about it very much.
He talked about it.
But
He talked about
when
it.
he made that
He knew the
comment about
psukim, didn't he?
he lost his manuscript, and what did he get back in that
The
other
Shema,
jacket?
right? He
The
got
the
Shema.
Shema, yeah.
But that, I found that
Yeah.
really profound.
Oh, there's a few places. If you remember, he was speaking later when he speaks to this rabbi who didn't have children with his second wife. Right? He lost his family, 6 children in the war. He married again, and she was sterile, or he was sterile, whatever it was. And
He couldn't
and
be at
he
6 children.
well, he couldn't have been.
was,
Who knows?
yeah. She was.
Post-war, you never know.
Yeah.
In any case,
What would have become?
In any case, what he says to the rabbi, he doesn't get to the rabbi until finally he says, "Isn't there?" He says, talks about his tears, and he quotes him a pasuk from Tehillim. He knew the pasuk from Tehillim that God saves your tears, and so all that.
That happens with a lot of these people.
No, but
They're
yes,
brought
I'm
up.
not saying that he wasn't. I think that I'm not saying that it's not a religious. I'm saying that it wasn't faith-based.
No.
No.
And I think
But I
that's
know.
very important to differentiate because
I
we
agree.
tend to. It's one of the pet peeves I have with religion. I'm not. I don't speak a great deal. I don't know if you noticed, but I don't speak a great deal about religion and faith. I speak almost none. No, never. You will very rarely, if ever, hear me speaking about faith. That's something that I have a big issue with. Not that I don't believe that it's necessary at times, but I'm concerned about it being presented far too much for our. It's why I'm much more of an existentialist, personally, in my philosophy. But it's not about me. This is about this book. It's one of the reasons why I this book spoke very deeply to me, because I don't think that. First of all, I don't think that there's anywhere in Torah that asks us to have faith anywhere, not once, not anywhere. There is issues of emunah, and emunah doesn't mean faith; it means faithfulness. Right? To be faithful to something. The only other thing that Torah ever speaks to us about is knowledge, but which is da'at, right? So it talks about with vis-a-vis God. It never asks us to have faith in God. It asks us to be faithful to God. And it asks us to know God. It charges us to know God. That's all over the place. Ve'yadata hayom b'shevota levavecha ki Adonai hu Elohim. Know today that the Yod Kevav God. King David says to his son Shlomo, Da'at Elohei avicha ve'ovdehu. Know the God of your father or serve him. King Solomon writes, Bechol derachecha da'ehu ve'yusheru. And all your paths. That's you, Da lifnei miyata omed. Exactly right. So there's Da'at all the time. Da'at is experiential knowledge. It's why that very same word is used for carnal knowledge in Torah, right, in the same capacity. Ve'ha'adam yada et hava ishto, right? It's used in those terms in where it's experiential. Da'at requires connectivity, knowledge through connectivity and experience. So we will say that a child reaches the age of da'at at puberty, right? Where psychologically, emotionally, physically they are prepared now for the beginnings of real relationships in mutual sense. It's bar and bat mitzvah. It's the reason. It's not 30 too often, on the table, and it's not working.
But how can you, if you're saying that we're asked to be faithful rather than to have faith? It's a question. How can you be faithful to something? I suppose you can be faithful to something or someone if you have knowledge of them. You don't have to have. But you must have faith in them.
When I say I have faith in you, I don't have to. I don't mean that I believe you exist. It means I believe, I am connected, trust, whatever in your capacity to, even though it hasn't happened yet. Right? When I say that I'm faithful to somebody, I don't cheat on that person. I'm faithful in business. I don't cheat in my business. It means that I am true to it, consistent with it, put myself with full integrity into it. So when I say, for example, I don't want to get too far off of this topic, I'm just presenting, but when I say, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shelema, in whatever of the 13 things I ma'amin, I am not saying that I believe in these things. I'm saying I live my life faithfully to those concepts. So when I say, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shelema bebi'at HaMashiach, I'm not saying I believe with complete belief or with full faith. What I'm saying is I put my faith into the concept of the coming of Mashiach and live my life faithfully to it, which means my life is lived in terms of that as a reality. In the same way that I say it with regards to God. That's genuinely what it means. It really is. I'm convinced without question.
It's
not for now.
More than that blind.
It connects to hope. Yes, it's not blind. It connects to hope.
It's not blind.
Right? I find my hope in the fact that I see trends towards this in the world, even though I can't, prove to you but based on my experience of life and my experience of the way things run, that whether we started as amoeba and came out, whatever you want to say, however you want to look at it. I have a hope for it because I see trend and expressions of it flashing here and there, and I have a faithfulness to it because all that I know about the nature of reality speaks to me as though it is real, right? But there are two things. We'll get back to I'm just saying that in terms of how he deals with the world. As an existentialist, he deals with the world in very real terms. So when I say religion, right, I don't want to back to that point, right? I don't want to confuse religion with faith. So I tend to shy away from using religion in general because it's immediately how people think of it. Yeah, I use God, I'll use behaviors and so on and so forth, but I don't like to use the word religion very much. But there's two things I wanted to bring out here also and see that he brings in the book, and one of them is this idea that happens a few times in where he talks about being stripped bare, not only of one's clothing, but of every last connection that a person has in life. And this is difficult because it's very uncomfortable to speak about. We don't, it's not something that we and unfortunately, the Holocaust is one of the only situations in recent experience, collective consciousness, that we have such circumstances in where a human being could literally be stripped bare of every last possible connection that they had to a life. And the question then is, is your being. And you think back, it's interesting because he said, I'm going to connect this to the second thing. The second thing is the existential vacuum that he wrote about, that I want to talk about that a bit and hear about that, but it's almost the other side of the coin. Whereas, with the Great Depression, it was not uncommon for a person who lost his fortune to jump off a building, and you conjure of Levi when they're consecrated, they're stripped and they're shaved completely before they are. It says ve'haviru tar al kol besaram. Put a razor over their entire body.
Levi'im, not Kohanim.
Levi'im were Kohanim down to their core existence before they were brought, into being. This became a whole problem with Korach. I'm writing now about Korach. Korach actually means the name actually means bald. Kereach is bald, right? So he has this whole problem where his wife, the Midrash says that his wife, he comes home after this consecration. He goes, well, what happened to you? What is he playing you for a fool, this Moses? You look what he's done. He makes you look. In any case, this is how he opens. And then he writes, this keeps being back home to me. He says, when he was talking about his manuscript, and he says, what about my manuscript? And his friend just says, shit, the whole thing is done, right? He says, at that moment, I struck out my whole former life.
My whole
former life. So there's that, right? That happens there, right? But he consciously strikes out. He remembers his wife, but what he realizes that he has to do, it's not just moving forward. I think that there is, of course, that element. You can't move forward if you're weighed down by the past. But in order to do that, one must know in some capacity that their life in and of itself is meaningful. It's something that's very hard for us to relate to, I think. And I think that all of us could only speak about it conceptually, theoretically, but it's being brought out here. And where meaning of one's existence, outside of relationships, even things that one wrote, learned, expressed, aside of every other thing, one's pure being. And he brings that up over and over again. He brings it over here. I speculated that for most of them, these people, the losses had really been few. Whoever was still alive had reason for hope. Health, listen to how he writes though. Health, family, happiness, professional abilities, fortune, position in society, all these things were things that could be achieved again or restored. I'm going to read you the list. Health, family, happiness, all of these things. There were people that came out of this war that had full businesses, family, a full world left behind and completely reconstructed an entirely new world, new family, new wife, new children. And so he writes this, that we still all had our bones intact. By the way, the Hebrew word for bone is etzim, which literally means self. Right? Atzmi. When I say atzmi, it's me. It's myself. So bone is etzim. It's like all I've got. Yeah. Whatever we've gone through could still be an asset to us in the future. And he quoted from Nietzsche, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. But that idea, to me, I feel that, I don't even know if we can relate to it as a reality, but this is something that comes up in the book over and over again, where he feels very strongly that there is a bedrock existence of a person it is, and that should be the beginning point, not all we've got, but it is the beginning point, and it is strong enough for me to be able to build my life. There's an interesting, I'll open, and I'll tell you this, and then I'll open for the thoughts, but interesting story that's told in the Talmud, in the 5th parak in the 25th page of Ta'anit, and where Rabbi Eliezer, he was destitute. He was known to be destitute, and he was ill, and they used to let blood in those times. So he goes to let blood, and he has no money to eat. They didn't give you a cookie and orange juice, afterwards. Nothing. So what he finds is a head of garlic, and he pops that in, and he faints. Right. And his students find him or passed out, and he's laughing a little and seriousness and whatnot. He finally comes to, and they say, what happened? He says, well, I passed out, but I dream and I saw God. Tells him. He says, well, tell us, what happened? He says, I said to God, look, how long am I going to have to go through this? I mean, I can barely manage to put even food on my table. I run from day. How much longer are you going to have me run like this? So he says, so he goes, look, do I have most of... He goes, well, so he tells him, he goes, look, Eliezer, if you... I can restart the world again. And we'll see that maybe next time it'll be better for you. Eliezer says, Kule hai ve'ulai. He goes, all that? Next time it'll be better for me. You're going to push restart. I'll ask you, I have most of my life to live still, or have I lived it already? So God says, you've lived most of your life already. He goes, all right, so don't bother. You don't have to bother. So God says, I'm so happy that she didn't make me restart the world, Eliezer. Thank you. For that, I'm going to show you your world to come. And, he shows him the whole thing, whatever it is. In any case, what I always point, there's many lessons from that story. One is that God has to restart a world. Why can't he just put some funds into his bank account? No, I got to restart the entire world but that's another lesson. But the one thing was that he tells him next time maybe it will be better for you. So it's all a question. But there's one thing that's not a question. And that is that he would be there in that world. His circumstance is completely variable. But this existence called Eliezer, right? You'll be there. I just don't know how things will work out for you then. The existence of an entity, right, is very real, in and of itself. And he points out over and over again, this idea that you didn't have family and health and so on, but you could rebuild those things. What are the thoughts on that?
Can I say something?
Please.
After I finished it, I wanted to find out more about him. Because he just hinted that his wife had died, but he never
said
it out.
anything. Yeah.
And I wanted to find out what happened. So I started reading about him. And the extraordinary thing was that he married again shortly after, a few years after he came out, and he married a Catholic woman. And I found this very interesting because there were two things in the book that really made me stop and think. One was a sentence he said where we all have to bear our cross. And I thought, what Jew would ever say that? And then he referred to another thing about the prisoners looking forward to Christmas. And he said that they would build up all their hopes that this would all come to an end at Christmas. And when it didn't come to an end at Christmas, then they got incredibly depressed and committed suicide. I don't think the majority of the people in the camps were Jewish. I can't imagine that they were all looking forward to Christmas. And I think he was influenced by his Catholic wife and going to church and everything afterwards with what he wrote of it.
It's very
but
possible.
Christmas in the camp, maybe because something happens, because they're German, something happens in the camp at Christmas, and perhaps certain generosity is given at Christmas. Maybe maybe there was something.
It's possible. I don't know.
They live in Christian societies.
Yeah,
mainly.
so they knew.
He wrote this book called Paper in 1946. So that would have been before he met his second wife.
It would have been, but maybe
it was
he changed it a bit.
Yeah,
later.
Well, there were
it
different
was
editions.
Because they put some statistics that it looks like it's much later.
But my question is about this. In other words, that idea of one's core being, without anything else. I mean, what are...
For me, connected to the soul. That when they say they're stripped to the bones, is that you have your material body in this life, but you have your soul, and that soul will be again, will come again, it was before, and you always have that, whatever it's taken away. Even if you die, your soul remains. For me, it's
that there's a core of existence.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Can an existentialist be spiritual?
Be what?
I don't know the answer to this. Can an existentialist be spiritual?
I mean, he is.
He is very much so.
Yeah, he is.
And especially when he talks about, he's thinking about his wife, and then this bird comes and...
But why not? Why can't
The good majority of existentialists...
I'm just asking the question, I don't know.
The good majority of existentialists are dubious to spirituality.
That's why I asked the question.
Because it's not something we know exists. he would argue and say, of course we do. So there's two manner, Yisrael thing, because of that, because of what he writes about coexistence, because about the relationships and meanings and so on and so forth. The other side of the coin, I know too, and this is the Sartrean approach, right, and a bit of Nietzsche and so on. But the all I know to exist is now. It's all. I have no past. I have nothing but what is right in front of me. So what happens with that view of existentialism is that I parse life into snapshots without any type of continuity or memory. Notice how much he talks about memory, right? Youth, lacking memory and all of that, right? And that brings us to the question of his existential vacuum, where there's the meaninglessness, right? So it's almost, and he writes not like the other existentialists, but the other approach is that all I've got is the moment. And I have nothing but this moment in front of me. Yeah.
I don't really understand that, because when you say, I have got nothing but this moment, that in itself is clearly false, because I have got me. And by that I mean I have got the character, if that's the word we want to use, which I have created from the moment of birth, maybe before, from the moment of birth up to this moment. So there's the moment surrounding me, but there is me in this moment, which has been constructed and is, as he says, these are the facts, this is the past, it's all happened now. I really did do this bad thing there and this better thing there, and made good choices, bad choices, and that now does exist. That certainly exists.
Well,
so,
see, the hardcore existentialists on the other side would say, well, it's very nice that it exists in your mind, Michael. But the reality is that you are nothing except for what you are right now. And so, yeah. No, I'm not. I'm just being devil's advocate. I believe you. I agree with you. But
I understand.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is when you say except for what you are right now, but that's like saying if you dissociate the person's character from the person, and you imagine the person goes through their life, like in the picture of Dorian Gray. So you go through life painting your portrait, and at any moment you say all that exists is the present moment. But no, what exists is this portrait which you have painted up till now.
Right.
That also exists. And it's merely, it's not a tangible thing, but it is the state of you. It's the state that you are in. And that's what you have created.
So that's very much the way that we think about things. But what the other side would say is that it exists only in your mind. Those things exist only in your mind. There's no place that they exist. They happened, but the minute that they happened, they're gone. So all you've got is what is now. Now the fact that you happen to have a memory of these things and you construct and interweave, you weave these things together. Yes, it's why I mention, very often that Rosh Hashanah is called Yom HaZikaron for that reason. Right? The question of you, which is the question of Rosh Hashanah, what do you wish to be? How do you look at your life? It all requires memory. If you don't have memory, which is zikaron, there's no self to speak of. All you've got is the moment. I'm saying that you can argue, right? But what Sartre wrote a huge amount on for, I don't know why, but nonetheless, very cold. Yeah. It's very cold thought. Doesn't provide. He'll say, fine, for our psychology, we will maintain these memories as a running work of what I am, a portrait, if you will, of what I am, but they're not real. And that pulls out any element or essence of meaning of life. They will always laugh, and he writes about this. He says that the evacuation of meaning in this manner immediately introduces cynicism into life, and that's how a person lives. They laugh at everything. And they destroy everything by this type of laughter, of where you can feel that something's meaningful, but it isn't really. In a Torah perspective, Amalek is essentially this side of the coin, where Israel is the other side of the coin. They're both existentialists in the manner of accepting realities in certain terms. The only difference is that Israel will accept the reality as he puts it, and where the past is irrevocably stored. Whereas an Amaleki will say, all you've got is what you've got. now, and that's it. So you can talk about past all you want and fool yourself because of your mechanism all you wish, but it's nothing more than what it is that lives in your mind. The funny thing is that these are the only two nations Tanakh calls Reshit. They're the first. Right? Everything else falls away, because everything else is figment of imagination. These are the only two nations that deal in some way with existential realities. The only question is, what side of the coin do we take? So it's Israel against Amalek at the end of the day. But this
Sorry, no, you keep saying existential. My first contact with existential literature was Sartre.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't say it as nicely as you do.
When I think of nausea, I think it must be called nausea in English. I don't know. And this one.
Yeah.
This one is so spiritual.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. I'm responding to what you're saying. Yeah.
That's why.
That's why I'm saying this is a Yisrael, as opposed to what I would call an Amalek perspective in terms of how it is that they're portrayed through. Because Amalek is karecha, it's happenstance, it's randomness, it's all about. Whereas Yisrael is you can't. Sartre would never say ever that the past is the only reality that there is, that it's all irrevocably. No, I mean he never in a million years. Right, so it's a question of what level of existentialism one has. He has a very profound sense of existence beyond just what it is that I am now. He has this sense of being, of a world that is, in its wholeness and its fullness, on some level, on some plane, that allows for that.
So maybe it has to be redefined. And
What?
not use the word existentialism.
No, it's just a question of how I see existence. So existentialist thought, as opposed to faith, self-oriented thought, and where it's the only thing that matters is my psychology, as opposed to what the nature of being is. Which is why I guess we've What were you gonna say? This last point, it's funny. It shocked me, not so much, that he writes about this existential vacuum. Right, we'll read a quick. Where did I put it? Yeah, page 106 in my book, but I don't know if you've got it. It's at the back. He talks about the existential vacuum. The existential vacuum is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. This is understandable. It may be due to a twofold loss, which man has had to undergo since he became a truly human being. At the beginning of human history, man lost some of the basic animal instincts in which an animal's behavior is embedded and by which it is secured. The instinct, right? Such security, like paradise, is closed to man forever. He's not able to save himself. Man has to make choices, as opposed to instinctual actions, right?
But that's what separates man from beast.
Perhaps, this is also under attack today. It's not so sure, This is a very, anyway, there's so much about that. I mean, you could do Pesach sermons from this, you could do everything. Anyway, so he says, that's why he says, there's the Statue of Liberty on one coast, there should be the Statue of Responsibility on the... No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, or he does what other people wish him to do. A statistical survey, this I thought was fantastic, a statistical survey recently revealed, that among my European students, 25% showed a more or less marked degree of existential vacuum, meaning meaninglessness to their existence. Among my American students, 60%.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah. The existential vacuum, well, let's talk about that for a minute, but the existential vacuum manifests itself mainly in a state of boredom. Now we can understand Schopenhauer when he said that mankind was apparently doomed to vacillate eternally between the two extremes of distress and boredom. In actual fact, boredom is now causing and certainly bringing to psychiatrists more problems to solve than distress. So the experience of one's life when they are void of action and doing, there's depression that sets in. And this is what he calls existential vacuum, and where there's a keen sense of meaninglessness in one's own life. So first of all, why do you think that it was 20? I'm not so sure that that's the case anymore today. But why is it 25% in Europe and 60% in America?
It's difficult. You can
Pretend that you don't remember. Know that I'm an American.
It's the thinking.
Yes,
Is it
indeed.
because there are so many outside forces in America that can take over people's lives? For example, gadgets and things. Whereas here, there isn't.
We've got
We're
gadgets. I
catching
mean,
up.
there's
We're
gadgets.
catching up.
Could it be the fact that America, of itself as America, is very young, and Europe is very old? So,
Well,
so
there's
the
definitely
reality
part
of
of it.
Europe is very. You have more memory to retrieve.
More history.
More, sorry.
It's rooted.
Yeah, it's more rooted.
Angeles, for my sister's wedding just now, and my aunt from New Jersey was there, and I said, I was in Rome and I thought of you because she loves Rome and whatever. I said, I thought of you. She said, I could never live here in Los Angeles. She lives in New York, but I could never live. I said, why? She goes, there's just nothing real here.
There's nothing
Real.
Real.
There's just nothing real here. There's no lives. Everybody's transplanted. There's no and it's true because in Los Angeles, very few Angelinos generations in. Everybody moves there, So it's just everybody's transplanted. There's no depth. There's nothing that. And she's very right about that. It's very much the case with Los Angeles, but there's no question
Could be that.
that there's an element of that. I think it's broader, but there's no question. Look, the oldest thing in America that you could possibly find, unless you're going to the Tar Pits Park, and where you see fossils, the oldest thing that you find humanly is the Declaration of Independence. What building do you have that brings it? I mean, I remember the oldest building that I saw was Independence Hall, which is younger than Bevis Marks. I mean, it's definitely true that coupling, I think that it's coupled with another thing, but there's no depth. There's a limit to the depth that they can draw from, right? The ancient knowledge that flows in the streets here, which for an American is very clear. I'm saying personally, I walk, nobody cares, I walk down to synagogue every morning, and I still love it. I mean, I probably end up stopping eventually, but it's almost a year in, and I still love passing by the mailbox. What do you call it, mailbox?
Postbox.
The letterbox with VR on it.
Yes.
I still love it. I just love it. It's
But
It's-
isn't history connected with education?
It is. So the other thing is the problem of freedom in America. Because with the freedom comes a huge amount of entitlement. The levels of entitlement in America are off the charts compared to the levels of entitlement that people feel here. I think that it's on the rise here. What do I mean by
It is on the rise.
I mean that there is an assumption that I have inalienable rights that are mine from birth, that the country and the world owe me my right to be as I wish to be. And it is just, you don't find very many Europeans thinking that way in their conscious thought, just this is the way that I see the world. It's not just, that I take time to question it in my head. This is the way that I eat and breathe and sleep. And it's the way that, that my ability to live my life as I wish it should never be under question in any capacity.
And that is owed to you.
And it's owed to me. So when you couple that with no memory, right, it's a dangerous concoction, right, which is why he said, there should be a statue of responsibility on the other coast, because liberty's fine, but liberty is dangerous because it completely... So what ends up happening is that meaning is at a premium, or it's very rare that a person finds an innate sense of meaning, either because of the depth of history that one cannot deny, simply by living in this place, knowing that everywhere that I look screams to me about the depth of history and the people and lives and hundreds of years that have preceded me in this place and that have brought me here, even on an unconscious level, even if the most base individual that has no real conscious contemplation. It's just part of the environment. So you can do little not to feel it. I think, unfortunately, the American psyche, because of media and movies and whatever, is pervading a lot of the Western world.
It's not a real world.
It's not real. It doesn't, and therefore, and so when you have 60, and this is when he's writing. This is in the early, what is it? The early. When did he write this? 40s.
46, the first edition.
So I don't know if that's or not, but
I don't
American
know.
students being 60%, I'm not surprised by it, but it's an amazing thing, because if you couple that with the feeling, it's meaningless. You can't have, and it's so much Middle America. It's so much Middle American where I'm not doing it. There's not much to be doing.
I think Europe had so many wars, and until very recently, you were loyal or patriotic, and therefore you had a purpose to defend.
Well, people have that. People have that in America. They're very, very
much so.
patriotic.
Yeah.
Very,
Much
very
more-
patriotic.
Much more than us.
Yes, there's a very powerful patriotism, but it
They
doesn't
are
necessarily
American.
connect to one's personal existence. There's only so much that a person can. Unless you're Jack Bauer or something, from. There's how much can one say that I am America? You feel that your life is empty, and all you need is a Sunday afternoon to get depressed. No, really, all you need is Sunday afternoon to get depressed. No, it really is.
But is that not what they say about 9/11? That America didn't realise that people didn't couldn't understand their position in the world, or wouldn't accept their position in the world, and they were knocked for six by the fact that there was hatred towards them, because they were so secure in themselves. They could not understand that people
They
didn't
could
like them.
not get over it. I mean, I hate to say, I don't mean to belittle it, but it's almost become somewhat maudlin, the response of 9/11 in the United States of America. I mean, it's become this colossal tragedy that, don't get me wrong, it was a terrible tragedy.
Hence that story with Mark Hamill.
Yes, he
Yes.
writes this story and he uses
Yeah.
9/11 to be...
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying that it wasn't it, but it just became, the nation was devastated at this. Israel goes through, equivalents like this. Absolutely devastated.
No, they were just
because
shocked.
there'd never been such
Yeah.
terrorism.
Never. Well, there was Pearl Harbor, but that wasn't, that wasn't
but
anywhere
on
near
American soil.
to civilians.
Yes.
Well, Pearl Harbor was American soil, but it wasn't civilians.
They're very
This was
They're
just
not used
civilians.
to it, that's-
So for them, and you had to have seen, the response of the country after that. It forced the country to really dig down and say, okay, who are we and what are we about?
And what influence are we having on the
And
world?
what was happening in the world? So I'm just saying that there's this pervasive issue that I think that now, I don't know how he would respond to our day and age. I think that now it's like well into 80%, and I would say that it's probably across the Western world at this point, and where we've just come to a point where, because of our need for all of this liberty and freedom and so on and so forth, we, without the responsibility element of it, we've brought ourselves into an existential vacuum.
But also, I think what society values. If a society values material and hedonistic
Because they're
pleasures,
external.
Yes.
Yes.
then if you base your society on a bigger house and a car and a better
Mhm.
job, when you don't reach, or when you reach it and then you realize, is that all?
Mm.
Or when you don't get there,
Mm.
then you focus on
Consider
life,
the
your meaning of
effect.
life
Right.
becomes
So we spend so
emptiness.
much time working on these elements that are external elements, and we find that we are almost all but bankrupt when it comes to our actual being, of what we are.
It says here that he talks about that there's a minority only of decent people in the world.
Mm.
And he says here at the end, and he sees a very big challenge for the minority. The world is in a bad state, but everything will become still worse unless each of us does his best. He says, so let us be alert. Since Auschwitz man is capable of, since Hiroshima we know what is at stake.
Mm.
And I think that is a very sad indictment of the world that we live in. Really.
But he's an optimist.
Absolutely.
He's an optimist, and rightfully so.
You picked a good book.
I try.
I struggled with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good
No, he's an optimist.
And he's trying to put that optimism
Even
into
when he
us.
wrote it, the thing that I got hardest was, I mean, for him to write about the guards, you know,
That they were good
that he was
guys.
even able to find guards that were better and worse guards.
Yeah.
You know, he looked at humanity,
Yeah.
To the goodness.
this amazing creature
With no
called
hatred.
human. Yeah,
But,
just
but we don't do that today. That
No.
would be called judgmental. And one of the cliches of any kind of public pronouncement is to say such things as, the British people deserve something or other, and that's actually implicitly the entitlement that you were talking about. There's no particular thing that any individual has done of any kind at all, but they deserve it. It's, we're entitled.
Yeah. And that's the idea, the deserve.
Well, of
Right?
course.
There's no deserve.
Yes.
Yeah, there's choices that you can make and things that one can respond to, but there's no deserve. But it is very much a deserving.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
So, my pleasure. Thank you, as always. And we couldn't do it without you.
We go to our next.
So I'm thinking like this. It's a very short period because as far as I see on my diary, it's 11th June, which is our next meeting.
There's
Do you
another
have
book
it?
to get through?
So what I'm thinking is like this, if you're all right. This was nonfiction. So I know that we want to do the Black Swan, but I'm going to hold on that till we do a fiction, and then we'll do that, a nonfiction. So I'd like to do a short story for our next time. It's 3 weeks. It's about 3 weeks and change.
One short story.
One short story. So if you finish it, and you have time to think about it. I want to do A River Runs Through It by Norman MacLean. I think it's Norman.
What's it called?
A River Runs Through It. You can get it on the Kindle. It's in Amazon UK.
Who is it by?
MacLean. Is it Norman? Let me make sure it's Norman. Yes, Norman MacLean. MacLean. You're free, of course, to read the other short stories in the book, but that's the short story that I want to discuss.
Oh, there's more than one.
So
Yeah.
it's called A River Runs Through
The short story is called A River. Actually, I think it's A River Runs Through It and other short stories. They actually made a movie about it, but don't watch the movie.
Norman who?
MacLean.
Oh, MacLean.
MacLean. MacLean, but it's spelled.
The Irish
It's
way
spelled.
of
Yeah,
spelling.
right. It's spelled
You'll find
MacLean, like clean, MacLean.
That's the Irish way. MC is Irish, huh? MC is
Norman
Celtic.
MacLean, here we are.
All right.
And when is the other
Are
one?
you in Amazon?
A river runs through it.
There you got it.
In
That's
76 he wrote it.
Yeah. It's a powerful story.
I've never heard of him.
June the 11th.
Well, now you have.
Yeah.
Yes. Now you can say you have.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
very
funny watching
I
that.
know.
Oh, you're watching it. Yeah, it's
And you're
delayed.
telling me nothing. Once it's gone, it's gone. I'm saying, it's not. I can still see it. It's still there.
Yeah, I better stop.
I have to say, I thought this was tremendous.
It's a brilliant-
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad
Yeah, I
that you
really
enjoyed
enjoy it.
I'm glad. Thank you for participating. I'm glad. It was good to have you.
I found it very uplifting
Yes, it is.
in a very strange
And the fact that he
way.
survived such atrocities.